Hi, everybody. Welcome to another book for KFC Cool First Chapter Reads. This is our author of the month, Abby. And so I have another book by Abby called Trader on our KFC list. But this book that I'm going to share today, this is one of his most popular books, Poppy. This is a great story. We have this in the library. And I'd like to share with you the first chapter of Poppy by Abby. It was written back in 1995. That's a long time ago. And I like the introduction of this book. It's got a map that kind of gives you where the story is taking place. And you can study that map and kind of make that come alive in your head by using that map. All right, chapter 1 is called Mr. Ocax. A thin crescent moon high in the sky shed faint white light over Dimwood Forest. Stars glowed, breezes full of ripe summer fragrance floated over nearby meadow and hill. Dimwood itself, veiled in darkness, lay utterly still. At the very edge of the forest stood an old charred oak tree on which sat a great horned owl. The owl's name was Mr. Ocax, and he looked like death itself. Kind of looks like that right there. That's kind of looking like an owl face. I wonder if this is Mr. Ocax. Mr. Ocax's eyes, flat upon his face, were round and yellow with large ebony pupils that enabled him to see a few other creatures. Moonlight, even faint moonlight, was as good as daylight for him. And if you've ever been outside on a full moon, it's like the lights on outside on the earth. You can see all kinds of things. With his piercing gaze, Mr. Ocax surveyed the lands he called his own, watching for the comings and goings of creatures he considered his subjects and his dinners. He looked at Glitter Creek, home of the fish he found so appetizing, the tar road across which tasty rabbits were known to hop, Jay's Wood, where meaty chipmunks sometimes skittered before dawn. By swiveling his head, he searched the marsh for a savory frog, then New Field, where usually he could count on a delicious vole or two. Now, I don't know what a vole is, V-O-L-E. You might want to see what that is. It's some kind of little critter because we're talking about an owl, Mr. Ocax, and he's surveying his property for food. So it's some kind of little creature. I've just never heard of it. He looked at Gray House where Farmer Lamont used to live, the bit upon the old orchard. He even looked nervously towards New House. But nowhere did he see a thing to eat. Profoundly annoyed, Mr. Ocax was beginning to think he would have no dinner that night. But finally, there, near the top of Bannock Hill, where the ponderosa pines all had been cut, where only a few struggling saplings and bushes grew, he saw movement. Just the glimmer of food was enough to cause the owl's heart to pound. He curved black beak to clack. He feathered his horns to stand tall. I think he's going in for it. Mr. Ocax shifted his head from right to left, forward and back. When he did so, he beheld 2 mice. Of all the creatures the owl hunted, he enjoyed mice the most. They were the best eating, to be sure, but better still, they were the most fearful, and Mr. Ocax found deep satisfaction in having others afraid of him. And here, after a wait of nearly the whole night, were 2 savory subjects to terrify before he ate them. One of the 2, a deer mouse, crouched cautiously beneath a length of rotten bark. The other, a golden mouse, stood open on his hind legs, his short tail sticking straight out behind his for balance. From his left ear, an earring dangled. In his paws, he held a hazelnut. It's not as if I haven't warned these mice, Mr. Ocax murmured to himself. If they will move about without my permission, they have only themselves to blame for the consequences. and he leaned forward to listen, his sharp as needle talons, 4 to each large claw and jet black at their tips, cut deeply into the branch he was perched on. Catching these 2 mice, he mused, is going to be fun. On Bannock's Hill, the golden mouse turned to his timid companion and said, Poppy, girl, this hazelnut is bad to the bone. Bet you seed to sap, there's more where it came from. Come on out and dig. Ragweed, Poppy replied as she sniffed tensely in all directions. You promised we'd dance when we get here. We can't do it in the open. Besides, I want an answer to your question. So will you please get under here with me? And that is where those 2 little mice are. So far we know the mice, their name, Poppy and Ragweed. Ragweed laughed. Dude, you must think I'm dull as a dormouse. You just want me to get some of this nut. I don't want any of your precious nut, Poppy insisted. I want to give you my answer, and I want to dance. Isn't that the reason we came up on this hill in the first place? Only it's not safe out there. Oh, tell me about it. You heard my father's warnings, Poppy went on. It's Mr. Ocax. He might be watching and listening. Well, we know he is, don't we? We've already heard Mr. Ocax. He already has these 2 mice in his view. Ragweed, Poppy cried. That's ridiculous. Mr. Ocax does rule Dimwood, so we have to ask his permission to be here. And you know perfectly well we never did. Dude, I'm not going to spend my life asking an old owl if it's okay every time I want to have some fun. Know what I'm saying? This is our moment, girl, right? And now that I've dug this nut up, I'm going to enjoy it. Besides, he said, it's too dark for an owl to see me. Poppy, Mr. Ocax scoffed under his breath. Ragweed. What stupid names mice have. Now, if only that deer mouse will move just a little further out from under the cover, I'll be able to snare both mice at once. The mere thought of such double catch made Mr. Ocax hiss with pleasure. Then he clacked his beak, spread his wings, and rose into the night air. Up he circled, his fluted flight feathers beating the air silently. High above Bannock Hill, he looked down. The golden mouse, the one eating the nut, was still out in the open. So brazen, so foolish. Nevertheless, Mr. Ocax decided to hold back another moment to see if the deer mouse might budge. And if you've ever seen an owl flying or heard an owl flying, you can't hardly hear them. They are so very silent. You don't even know they have flown past you. Ragweed, Poppy pleaded, please get under here. Girl, Ragweed said, do you know what your problem is? You let your tail lead the way. Poppy, hurt and wanting to show she was not a coward, poked her nose and whiskers out from under the bark. Ragweed, she persisted even as she began to creep into the open. Being careless is stupid. Her friend took another scrape at the nut and sighed with pleasure. Poppy, he said, you may be my best girl, but admit it. You don't know how to live like I do. Poppy took 2 more steps beyond the bark. Just then, Mr. Ocax pulled his wings close to his body and plunged. In an instant, he was right above and behind the 2 mice. Once there, he threw out his wings, braked his speed, pulled back up his head to protect his eyes, and thrust his claws forward and wide like grappling hooks to pounce. It was Poppy who had saw him. Ragweed! She shrieked in terror as she hurled herself back under cover. It's Ocax! But the owl had already come upon them. Down came his right claw. It scratched the tip of Poppy's nose. Down came his left claw. It was more successful, clamping around Ragweed's head and neck like a vise of needles, killing him instantly. The next moment, the owl soared back into the air. A lifeless Ragweed earring glittering in the moonlight, hung from a claw. As the hazelnut, it fell to the earth like a cold stone. Powerful but leisurely strokes brought Mr. Ocax back to his watching tree. Once there, he shifted the dead ragweed with one talon to break in one gulp. The mouse disappeared into his throat, earring and all. His hunger momentarily satisfied, Mr. Ocax tilted back his head and let forth a long, loud cry of triumph. Woo-hoo! Poppy did not hear the call. In her terror, she had fainted. Now she lay unconscious beneath the length of the rotten bark. The owl did not mind. He had enjoyed the first mouse, and so he decided to wait for the second. Indeed, Mr. Ocax was not entirely sorry that Poppy had escaped. She was terrified, and he enjoyed that. And for sure, he would get her soon. Oh, yes, he murmured to himself. Mice are the most fun to catch. Then Mr. Ocax did that rare thing for an owl. He smiled. And there is Mr. Ocax. He already got one mouse. I'm wondering if he's going to get Poppy. Because Poppy, remember, she was so scared she fainted. And so she's kind of laying near the log. And he knows this, Mr. Ocax. I wonder if he's going to swoop in and have another tasty dinner of mice. Read chapters to find out. This book is in the library in the fiction section under AVI. AVI is author Avi, and that's the first three letters of his last name, and that's exactly what he goes by, AVI. Come in and check it out. It's a great read.